I screamed for help until my voice disappeared, and that's when I realized no one was coming. Quick question before we continue. Where are you watching from right now? The fluorescent lights above me were too bright, too clinical, and I couldn't stop shaking. My hands were still cuffed behind my back, even though I'd told them, begged them, that I was pregnant. 22 weeks, triplets, high risk. The words had tumbled out of my mouth in the back of the patrol car, but the officer had just looked at me through the rearview mirror with dead eyes and said nothing. This wasn't supposed to happen. I was a student, a good student. I had a 3.8 GPA at the community college, working 2 part-time jobs to keep myself fed and housed in a studio apartment that smelled like mildew and old carpet. I was studying to be a nurse. I wanted to help people. And now I was here, in a holding cell that reeked of industrial cleaner and human desperation, because someone had decided I looked like a shoplifter. The security guard at the grocery store had grabbed my arm when I was leaving. He said he saw me put something in my purse. I tried to explain. I was dizzy, I had set my phone down in my bag while I was comparing prices on prenatal vitamins, I had paid for everything, I had the receipt right there in my hand. But he didn't care. He called the police. And when the officers arrived, they didn't care either. "We need to take you in," one of them said. "Let the courts sort it out." "I'm pregnant," I'd said, my voice breaking. "Please, I need to see my doctor today. I have an appointment. The baby's—" "You should have thought about that before you decided to steal," the other officer cut me off. I hadn't stolen anything. The receipt proved it. But they took me anyway. Now I was sitting on a metal bench in a cell with 3 other women, none of whom would look at me. My stomach cramped, a dull, persistent ache that had started in the patrol car and hadn't stopped. I tried to breathe through it the way my obstetrician had taught me, but the fear made it impossible to focus. I was supposed to be at my appointment right now. Dr. Monroe had warned me last week that my blood pressure was elevated, that carrying triplets was putting enormous strain on my body, that I needed to come in twice a week for monitoring. "Excuse me," I called out toward the bars. My throat was already raw from crying. "Excuse me, I need help. I'm pregnant and I'm having pains. Please." A guard walked past without even glancing in my direction. I tried again, louder this time. "Please, I need to see a doctor." Nothing. One of the women on the bench beside me, an older woman with gray streaks in her hair and a face that looked like it had seen too much, finally spoke. "Baby girl, they don't care. Save your breath." But I couldn't save my breath. The cramping was getting worse. It felt like someone was squeezing my insides with both hands, twisting. I stood up, moved to the bars, gripped them with both hands, even though it made the cuffs dig into my wrists. "Help! Someone help me! I'm pregnant! Please!" A different guard appeared, a woman this time, young, with her hair pulled back so tight it looked painful. She looked at me with something between annoyance and contempt. "Stop screaming. You'll get processed when it's your turn." "I need medical attention." I tried to keep my voice steady, even though panic was rising in my chest like water. "I'm having contractions. I'm only 22 weeks. If I go into labor now, the babies won't survive. Please." She stared at me for a long moment, and I hoped that maybe she would help. Maybe she had a sister, a daughter, a friend who'd been pregnant. Maybe she would see me as a human being. "You're not in labor," she said flatly. "You're just scared. Sit down and wait your turn." She walked away. The cramp intensified, stealing my breath. I doubled over, pressing my forehead against the cold metal bars. One of the other women in the cell, younger than the first, maybe in her 30s, came over and put a hand on my shoulder. "Breathe," she said quietly. "Just breathe. They'll move you eventually." But what if eventually was too late? I thought about my babies, 3 of them, growing inside me against all odds. The doctor had told me the pregnancy was a miracle. My hormone levels had been so low, she'd been certain I couldn't conceive naturally. But somehow, impossibly, 3 embryos had implanted, 3 tiny hearts beating on the ultrasound screen, 3 lives depending on me to keep them safe. And I was failing them. I was locked in a cell, accused of a crime I didn't commit, and my body was screaming that something was wrong. I screamed too. I screamed until my throat felt like it was tearing, until the other women in the cell moved as far away from me as possible, until a guard came back and threatened to put me in isolation if I didn't shut up. I shut up. Because what choice did I have? The cramping continued, and no one came. They processed me 4 hours later. 4 hours of sitting on that metal bench, feeling my body revolt against itself, feeling wetness between my legs that I was terrified to look at. When they finally called my name, I could barely stand. The woman who'd told me to save my breath had to help me up. "You're bleeding," she whispered. "Don't let them ignore you." I looked down. She was right. There was blood on the bench, blood on my jeans. Not a lot, but enough. Enough to confirm what my body had been trying to tell me for hours. The processing officer was a man in his 50s with a mustache and a bored expression. He took my fingerprints, my photograph, asked me questions about my address and employment while I stood there swaying, trying not to pass out. "I'm bleeding," I told him. "I need to go to a hospital." He glanced up from his computer screen. "You'll see the nurse." "When?" "When she gets here. She does rounds twice a day." "I can't wait that long, please. I'm pregnant with triplets. I'm high risk. I'm bleeding." He looked at me with the same dead expression I'd seen in the patrol car. "There's a procedure. You'll see the nurse." They took me to a different cell, smaller, with just 2 bunks and 1 other person. A woman who was asleep or unconscious, I couldn't tell which. I lay down on the bottom bunk because standing was becoming impossible. The cramping had evolved into something sharper, more focused. It felt like my body was trying to expel something it wasn't ready to let go of. I thought about calling my roommate, but they'd taken my phone. I thought about calling my mother, but we hadn't spoken in 3 years. Not since she'd told me I was wasting my life trying to go to college when I should just find a man to take care of me. I thought about the father of my babies, but that thought hurt worse than the cramping. He didn't know. He couldn't know. He was someone I'd met once at a charity gala I'd been working as a server. He'd been kind to me, which was rare among the wealthy people at those events. Most of them looked through servers like we were furniture. But he'd asked my name, asked about my studies, listened like what I said actually mattered. One thing led to another. One night, one impossible night that I'd convinced myself meant something. It hadn't meant anything. He'd disappeared back into his world of private jets and boardrooms, and I'd discovered 6 weeks later that I was pregnant. I'd tried to find him, but people like him don't leave trails for people like me to follow. I'd found his company's website, seen his picture, CEO, billionaire, philanthropist. I'd written an email to his corporate address, explaining the situation, asking for nothing except that he know. The email had bounced back. I'd tried calling. I'd been screened by 3 different assistants before giving up. He didn't want to know. That was clear enough. So I'd been facing this alone. And I'd been managing, somehow, working my jobs, going to my classes, saving every penny for the baby's arrival. My obstetrician had been helping me apply for assistance programs, for grants, for anything that might help me afford the medical care I needed. It was hard, but I was doing it. Until a security guard decided I looked like a criminal. The nurse came 6 hours later. I'd been timing the contractions by then, counting the seconds between them, watching them get closer together. I knew what that meant. I'd studied maternal health in my coursework. I knew exactly how bad this was. The nurse was an older Black woman with kind eyes, and the moment she saw me, her expression changed. "How long have you been bleeding?" 10 hours, maybe? She swore under her breath. "How far along are you?" 22 weeks. Triplets." She swore again, louder this time. She pulled out a blood pressure cuff, wrapped it around my arm. I watched her face as the numbers came up, watched her eyes widen. "Your blood pressure is through the roof. You need to be in an ambulance, right now." "I know," I whispered. "I've been telling them." She stood up, walked to the cell door, started yelling for a guard. When one finally appeared, she didn't hold back. "This woman needs to be transported to a hospital immediately. She's pregnant, she's bleeding, she's showing signs of preterm labor, and her blood pressure is in stroke range. If something happens to her or those babies because you people ignored her, you're all going to be facing a lawsuit." The guard, the same young woman from before, had the decency to look uncomfortable. "I'll need to get authorization." "Then get it, now. I'm not leaving here until she's in an ambulance." They made me wait another 2 hours while they got authorization. 2 more hours of contractions, of bleeding, of feeling my baby's movements becoming less frequent, less strong. The nurse stayed with me the entire time, holding my hand, telling me to hold on, promising me it would be okay. But I could see in her eyes that she wasn't sure. The cramping continued, and no one came. They processed me 4 hours later. 4 hours of sitting on that metal bench, feeling my body revolt against itself, feeling wetness between my legs that I was terrified to look at. When they finally called my name, I could barely stand. The woman who told me to save my breath had to help me up. "You're bleeding," she whispered. "Don't let them ignore you." I looked down. She was right. There was blood on the bench. Blood on my jeans. Not a lot, but enough. Enough to confirm what my body had been trying to tell me for hours. The processing officer was a man in his 50s with a mustache and a bored expression. He took my fingerprints, my photograph, asked me questions about my address and employment while I stood there swaying, trying not to pass out. "I'm bleeding," I told him. "I need to go to a hospital." He glanced up from his computer screen. "You'll see the nurse." "When?" "When she gets here. She does rounds twice a day." "I can't wait that long, please. I'm pregnant with triplets. I'm high risk. I'm bleeding." He looked at me with the same dead expression I'd seen in the patrol car. "There's a procedure. You'll see the nurse." They took me to a different cell, smaller, with just 2 bunks and one other person, a woman who was asleep or unconscious. I couldn't tell which. I lay down on the bottom bunk because standing was becoming impossible. The cramping had evolved into something sharper. When the paramedics finally came, they moved fast. They got me on a stretcher, started an IV, asked me questions I could barely answer because the pain was so intense. The nurse gave them my information, told them about the triplets, the high-risk pregnancy, the hours of ignored distress. One of the paramedics, a young man with gentle hands, looked at me with something like horror. "How long were you waiting?" 12 hours, I managed to say. He looked at his partner, and I saw something pass between them. Anger. Disgust. They wheeled me out of the jail, past the processing desk where the officer with the mustache was eating a sandwich, past the holding cells where other women were still waiting, still suffering, still being ignored. The cold night air hit my face and I started crying, great heaving sobs that I couldn't control. I was out, but I didn't know if my babies were okay, and that was the only thing that mattered. The emergency room was chaos. They wheeled me past rooms full of people, past nurses running with equipment, past a man screaming about pain in his chest. But the moment they heard 22 weeks, triplets, possible preterm labor, the chaos organized itself around me. A doctor appeared, young, female, with sharp eyes and quick hands. She pulled back the sheet, examined me, called out orders to nurses who moved with practice deficiency. "Get an ultrasound in here. I need labs, complete blood count, metabolic panel, coagulation studies. Type and cross for 4 units. And call OB. Tell them we need someone down here now." Someone cut off my jeans. Someone else wrapped a warm blanket around my shoulders. The IV in my arm started pumping fluids, and I felt the faintest bit of relief as my body absorbed the hydration it desperately needed. But the contractions kept coming, regular now, every 5 minutes. "Am I losing them?" I asked the doctor. My voice sounded small, childlike. She looked me in the eye. "I don't know yet, but we're going to do everything we can." The ultrasound machine arrived, wheeled in by a technician who looked like she'd just woken up. The doctor squeezed warm gel onto my stomach, pressed the wand against my skin, and suddenly the room was filled with the sound of heartbeats. 3 of them, fast and strong, like tiny drums. "They're alive," the doctor said, and I saw relief flash across her face. "All 3, heart rates look good, but—" She moved the wand, studying the screen with a frown. "You're showing signs of placental abruption. That's what's causing the bleeding, and your cervix is starting to dilate." I didn't need her to explain what that meant. If my cervix dilated much more, the babies would come, and at 22 weeks, they wouldn't survive. The OB arrived 15 minutes later, a tall woman with silver hair and an air of absolute authority. She looked at the ultrasound images, examined me, read through the notes from the jail nurse. Her expression grew darker with every page. "You were in custody for 12 hours with these symptoms and no one called for medical transport?" she asked. "They said I'd see the nurse when she made her rounds." The OB's jaw clenched. "That's criminal. That's actually criminal." She turned to the ER doctor. "We need to get her upstairs to labor and delivery. I want her on magnesium sulfate to stop the contractions, continuous monitoring for all 3 babies, and someone needs to call social services and legal. Someone needs to document exactly what happened in that jail." They transferred me to a room on the maternity floor, a private room with a window overlooking the parking lot and medical equipment that beeped and hummed around me. They hooked me up to monitors, 3 separate bands around my belly, each one tracking a different heartbeat. The magnesium made me feel strange, hot and sluggish, but the contractions started spacing out. A social worker came, a gentle woman who asked careful questions about what had happened, who took notes, who promised me that she would make sure the jail was held accountable. A patient advocate came, explaining my rights, explaining that I couldn't be held in custody while I was in medical distress, that the charges against me, charges that were based on nothing but suspicion and had already been dropped after they reviewed the security footage, meant I was free to leave once I was medically stable. But I couldn't leave, because my babies were still in danger. The OB came back that evening, after the contractions had finally stopped, after the bleeding had slowed to spotting. She sat in the chair beside my bed, looking tired but satisfied. She said, "You're going to be okay. The babies are going to be okay. We caught it in time, but it was close. Too close." "What happens now?" I asked. "Now you stay here. Bed rest, at least until we can get you stabilized. We'll monitor you all the clock. If you can make it to 24 weeks, the baby's survival rate dramatically increases. Every day matters." I wanted to believe her, but I'd been poor my entire life, and I knew how these things worked. Programs had waiting lists, resources ran out. People like me fell through cracks all the time. That night, alone in my hospital room, with only the sound of 3 heartbeats keeping me company, I let myself cry. I cried for everything that had happened, for the fear I'd felt in that cell, for the hours of being ignored, for the reality that I was facing this alone. I cried until I had nothing left, until exhaustion pulled me under. And then, in the darkness, I felt them move. All 3 of them, tiny flutters against my skin, like butterflies trapped inside me. They were fighting too, fighting to stay, to grow, to be born. I put my hands on my belly and made them a promise. "I won't let anything happen to you. I don't care what I have to do. You're going to be okay." I meant it, but I had no idea how I was going to keep that promise. 5 days passed. 5 days of lying in a hospital bed, of nurses checking my vitals every 4 hours, of watching the monitors track 3 separate heartbeats, of counting every flutter and kick to make sure my babies were still okay. The contractions hadn't returned, the bleeding had stopped, but my blood pressure was still elevated, and the doctors weren't willing to release me. "You need to stay until at least 24 weeks, the OB said every time I asked. "That's only 10 more days. I know it's hard, but—" "I can't afford 10 more days," I'd interrupted on the third day. "I've already lost both my jobs. My landlord called. I'm going to lose my apartment. My school is asking where I am. I can't just pause my life." "Your life will be a lot more paused if these babies come now and don't survive," she'd replied, not unkindly. "I know this is impossible, but we don't have a choice." She was right. I knew she was right, but that didn't make it easier. The social worker had helped me apply for emergency assistance, for medical coverage, for every program she could think of. But everything took time, and time was something I seemed to have too much and not enough of simultaneously. Too much time lying in this bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering how my life had fallen apart so completely in less than a week. Not enough time to figure out how to put it back together. On the 6th day, something strange happened. A man in a suit arrived at my door. Expensive suit, the kind that cost more than my rent. He introduced himself as an attorney, said he was representing me in a case against the city and the jail for medical negligence. I tried to tell him I couldn't afford an attorney, but he said someone else was covering his fees. "Who?" I asked. "I'm not at liberty to say, but they're very concerned about what happened to you, and they want to make sure it never happens to anyone else." He asked me detailed questions about my time in custody, about every interaction with the guards, about the timeline of my symptoms. He recorded everything, took notes, and promised me that there would be accountability. After he left, I lay there feeling confused and unsettled. Who would hire an attorney for me? I didn't have anyone in my life with that kind of money or influence. The mystery deepened that afternoon when a nurse came in with a bouquet of flowers. Real flowers, expensive ones, orchids and roses in shades of white and cream. The card said only, "You and your babies deserve better. From a friend." I stared at that card for an hour, turning it over in my hands, trying to figure out who it could be from. None of my classmates knew I was here. My roommate had texted once, but we weren't close enough for flowers. The jail nurse had checked on me once, but this didn't seem like her style. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about that one night, months ago, when my babies had been conceived, about the man who'd been kind to me, who'd listened, who made me feel like I mattered for a few hours. I'd tried so hard to find him, to tell him, but he'd been unreachable, protected by layers of assistance and corporate bureaucracy. What if he'd gotten my message after all? What if somehow he knew? No, that was ridiculous. Billionaires didn't send flowers to poor students they'd spent one night with. They didn't hire attorneys. They had lawyers to make problems like me disappear, not to help. But the thought wouldn't leave my mind. On the 7th day, the OB came in looking troubled. She sat down heavily in the chair beside my bed, and I knew immediately that something was wrong. "Your blood pressure isn't coming down," she said. "We've tried 3 different medications, and it's still too high. I'm worried about preeclampsia. If it develops into eclampsia, you could have a seizure. That's dangerous for you and the babies." "What do we do?" I asked, even though I was afraid of the answer. "We watch you even more closely. We run more tests, and if things get worse, we might have to deliver the babies early, even if they're not ready. It's a risk-benefit calculation. At some point, they're safer outside than inside if your body can't support the pregnancy." I felt cold all over. How early? "Hopefully not before 24 weeks, but I can't make promises." After she left, I called the nurse and asked for a phone. I needed to try again, one more time. I needed to reach the father of my babies, needed him to know that they might come too soon, that they might not make it. The nurse brought me a tablet, helped me access my email. I wrote a message to that same corporate address, knowing it would probably bounce again, but I had to try. "I don't know if you'll ever read this. I don't even know if you remember me, but I'm in the hospital, and our babies, yes, babies, triplets, might not survive. They're coming too early. I'm not asking for money or help. I just thought you should know. I thought they should exist to someone else besides me, even if it's just in an email. Their hearts are beating right now. They're fighting. I wanted you to know that. I sent it before I could second-guess myself, and then I cried again, because it felt like a goodbye. But what I didn't know, what I couldn't have known, was that the email didn't bounce this time. It landed in an inbox that was checked regularly by a man who'd been searching for me for months, ever since his head of security had flagged my previous messages and investigated the claims. A man who'd been horrified to discover that I'd been telling the truth, that he was going to be a father, that the woman he hadn't been able to stop thinking about had been trying to reach him while his corporate firewall blocked every attempt. A man who'd finally found me 3 days ago, just in time to watch the news report about a pregnant woman nearly dying in jail custody. A man who'd hired the attorney, sent the flowers, and was now on his way to the hospital with a rage that was barely contained and a determination that nothing would hurt his children or their mother again. I didn't know any of this as I lay in that hospital bed, watching the monitors, feeling my baby's kick, but I was about to find out. The hospital room door opened at 9 o'clock that night, and my world tilted sideways. He walked in like he owned the place, tall, dressed in dark slacks and a crisp white shirt with the sleeves rolled up, looking exactly like he did in the corporate photos I'd found online. But those photos hadn't captured the intensity in his eyes, the barely controlled fury in the set of his jaw, the way he moved with absolute purpose. Behind him were 3 other people, a woman in a business suit carrying a leather folder, a man who looked like private security, and the OB who'd been treating me, looking flustered and uncertain. I couldn't speak. I couldn't breathe. I could only stare as he crossed the room in 4 long strides and stopped at my bedside, his eyes scanning the monitors, the IV lines, the hospital gown I was wearing, my face. His expression shifted through a dozen emotions in seconds: relief, anger, pain, something that looked almost like grief. "I'm sorry," he said, and his voice cracked on the words. "I'm so sorry. I should have found you sooner. I should have—" He stopped, pressed his hand over his mouth, looked away. "I didn't know. I swear to God, I didn't know." "Did you get my emails?" My voice came out as a whisper. "Not until 3 days ago. My company has filters, screens for—" He shook his head sharply. "It doesn't matter. That's not an excuse. You tried to reach me and I failed you. I failed our children." He looked at my belly, where the monitor bands were wrapped, where 3 heartbeats were creating 3 distinct lines on the screen. "But I'm here now, and I'm going to fix this." The woman with the leather folder stepped forward. "Ms. Johnson, my name is Rebecca Chen. I'm Mr. Hartwell's personal attorney. We've been investigating what happened to you, and I want you to know that we're pursuing every legal avenue to hold the responsible parties accountable." "The city has already reached out about a settlement," the man, Hartwell, that was his name, Marcus Hartwell, said coldly, "after I made some phone calls and made it very clear what would happen if they didn't make this right. But money isn't enough. I want criminal charges. I want everyone who ignored you fired. I want—" "Marcus," the attorney said gently, "let's focus on what's happening right now." He took a breath, visibly trying to calm himself. Then he turned back to me, and his expression softened. "I want to take care of you, you and the babies. I want to move you to a better hospital, get you the best specialists, make sure you have everything you need. Will you let me do that?" I should have said yes immediately. Anyone in my position would have. But something in me resisted, some stubborn pride that had kept me going through years of poverty and struggle. "I don't need charity." "It's not charity." His voice was fierce. "You're carrying my children. Do you have any idea what that means to me? I've spent the last 3 days losing my mind, thinking about you in that jail cell, screaming for help that didn't come, bleeding and terrified and alone. Don't you dare call it charity when I'm trying to make sure nothing like that happens to you again." The monitor beeped, my heart rate spiking, and immediately the OB moved forward. "Everyone needs to calm down. This kind of stress isn't good for her or the babies." Marcus stepped back, held his hands. "You're right. I'm sorry." He looked at me again. "I'm not trying to control you. I'm not trying to take over your life. He ran a hand through his hair, and I saw how exhausted he looked, how worried. "Let me help. Please." The woman, who had been silent until now, the one in the business suit, spoke up. "Mr. Hartwell has arranged for a specialist in high-risk multiple pregnancies to consult on your case. She's one of the best in the country. She's reviewed your charts and agrees with your current care plan, but she has some additional suggestions that might help stabilize your condition. You don't have to accept the transfer to another hospital, but would you at least be willing to speak with her?" That seemed reasonable, safe. I nodded. Over the next hour, I met the specialist via video call, a woman named Dr. Reeves, who talked to me like I was a person, not a problem. She explained treatment options, answered my questions, never once made me feel stupid or inadequate. By the end of the call, I was crying again, but this time from relief. For the first time in days, I felt like someone was really listening to me, really seeing me. Marcus stayed the entire time, sitting in the chair beside my bed, asking questions, taking notes, making sure I understood everything. When the call ended, he looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "I know you don't know me," he said quietly. I know it was just one night, but I haven't stopped thinking about you since. I tried to find you, I had my people searching, but you didn't leave me your number and I only knew your first name. I thought maybe you regretted it, that you didn't want to be found. But then your emails came through and I realized—" His voice broke. "I realized I'd let you down in the worst possible way." "You didn't know," I said. "That doesn't make it okay." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, hands clasped. "I want to be a father to these children. I want to be whatever you'll let me be. I'm not asking you to marry me or move in with me or anything like that. I know we barely know each other, but I want to know you. I want to be there for you. And I want to make sure you and the babies have everything you need. Not because I'm trying to buy my way into your life, but because it's the right thing to do." I looked at him, really looked at him, at the dark circles under his eyes, the worry lines around his mouth, the way his hands shook slightly as he spoke. This wasn't a billionaire trying to solve a problem with money. This was a man who was terrified he'd already lost something he didn't know he had. "Okay," I said. "Okay? Okay. You can help. You can be involved. But I have conditions. Anything. I'm not moving into your house or becoming some kind of, I don't know, kept woman. I'm finishing my degree, I'm still going to be a nurse, and I make decisions about my body and my medical care. You can have opinions, but I get final say." "Absolutely. And we're going to get to know each other. Really know each other, not some weird transaction where you throw money at me and expect me to be grateful. If you're going to be in our babies' lives, you're going to be in mine too, as a person." For the first time since he'd walked into the room, he smiled. It transformed his face, made him look younger, less intimidating. "I think I can manage that." The attorney cleared her throat. "Mr. Hartwell, there's the matter of the paperwork." "Later," he said, not taking his eyes off me. "That can all wait." She nodded and left, taking the security guard with her. The OB checked my vitals one more time, adjusted the IV, and told me she'd be back in the morning. And then it was just the two of us, sitting in the quiet hospital room, with the sound of 3 heartbeats filling the space between us. "What are their names?" Marcus asked softly. "I don't have names yet. I was waiting. I wanted to meet them first." "Smart." He stood up, moved closer to the bed. Would it be okay if I understood what he was asking. I pulled back the blanket, lifted my hospital gown to expose my belly. His hand hovered over it for a moment, asking permission, and when I nodded, he placed his palm gently over the spot where one of the monitors was strapped. We stayed like that for a long moment, his hand on my stomach, feeling the baby move beneath his touch, his eyes filled with tears. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you for not giving up on them, for fighting for them." "They're my babies, of course I fought." "Our babies," he corrected gently, "if you'll let me claim them." I thought about everything that had happened in the past week. The jail cell, the guards who wouldn't listen, the hours of pain and fear, the blood, the certainty that I was going to lose everything. And then this impossible reversal, this man appearing like something out of a story, offering help I'd stopped believing would come. It wasn't a fairy tale. Real life didn't work like that. There would be complications ahead, challenges, difficult conversations about how to blend our very different worlds. But right now, in this moment, with his hand on my belly and our babies alive and fighting inside me, I let myself hope. You can claim them. You can claim all of us. 3 weeks later, I made it to 25 weeks, then 26, then 27. My blood pressure stabilized. The risk of preterm labor decreased. Dr. Reeves called it a miracle, but I knew it was more than that. It was excellent medical care, careful monitoring, the absence of stress about money and housing, and how I was going to survive. Marcus had rented me an apartment near the hospital, small but comfortable, in a safe neighborhood, with a nursery already set up for 3 cribs. He visited every day, sometimes twice a day, bringing food from restaurants I'd never been able to afford, books I'd mentioned wanting to read, baby clothes in 3 different sizes because we didn't know yet how big they'd be when they finally arrived. We talked. We talked about everything. His childhood in boarding schools, my childhood in poverty, his work, my studies, what we wanted for our children, what scared us, what made us laugh. We argued sometimes about politics and parenting philosophies and whether it was okay to eat cereal for dinner. We watched movies on my laptop. We planned a future that was still uncertain but felt possible. The babies were born at 34 weeks, 3 tiny, perfect humans who came into the world screaming and angry and alive. 2 girls and a boy. They spent 3 weeks in the NICU, growing stronger, learning to breathe on their own, fighting their way toward health with the same determination they'd shown in the womb. I named the boy after my grandfather, Isaiah. Marcus named the older girl after his mother, Catherine. We named the youngest girl together, Hope, because that's what she represented, what all 3 of them represented. Hope that life could change in an instant, that miracles could happen, that sometimes people showed up when you needed them most. The criminal charges against the jail staff never went forward. The system protected its own, as it always did, but the civil lawsuit resulted in policy changes, mandatory medical training, oversight reforms. It wouldn't undo what happened to me, but maybe it would protect the next woman who screamed for help in a cell. Marcus and I didn't get married, not right away. We dated, awkwardly at first, learning how to be partners and parents simultaneously. We fought sometimes over sleep deprivation and dirty diapers and whose turn it was to handle the midnight feeding. But we also laughed. We also fell in love, slowly, carefully, with full knowledge of each other's flaws and fears. A year later, he proposed in the nursery at 3 in the morning while we were both covered in spit-up and exhausted. I said yes because I couldn't imagine my life without him anymore, without this family we'd built from chaos and fear and one impossible night. The babies thrived. Isaiah was quiet and observant. Catherine was fierce and loud. Hope was stubborn and sweet. They looked like both of us, carrying pieces of 2 very different worlds in their faces. Sometimes I still dreamed about that jail cell, about screaming until my voice disappeared, about the certainty that no one was coming. But then I'd wake up in a bed I didn't have to worry about affording, in an apartment where 3 cribs held 3 sleeping babies, next to a man who'd moved heaven and earth to find me. And I'd remember that someone did come. He came too late to prevent the trauma, but not too late to be part of the healing. That had to be enough. It was enough.